like this. Okay. We are Sukkah al Gabi Sukkah. We'll read that. So it's about 10 lines from the bottom line, starts with the word V'harei. And the issue here is the following. The Mishnah said that if somebody is in a sleeps under a canopy in a sukkah, they don't fulfill their obligation. If, however, they sleep under a teepee-shaped canopy with 2 poles at the end rather than 4, in like a bar, going horizontal, then it's okay because then it doesn't create a separate roof. If it's not a tefach on the top, it's not a separate roof. That seems reasonable enough. Then came along a lenient reading of Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel that said that even if it is a roof, you do, like a normal roof, it's only a problem if it's 10 tefachim high. Only then is it like you're in a separate zone, in a separate tent. But if it's a lower roof, if it's a lower canopy, it's not a problem. So you needed 2 criteria: to have a roof, for you to this tent in the sukkah, and for it to be 10 tefachim high. But the Gemara had a braita that seemed to say either criteria was a problem, not both. Actually, let's start again from asking from the braita, and we'll pick it up from there. So it says like this. It says Tashma. So we'll go even. We'll start earlier. It's about 20 lines from the bottom. The line starts with the word from Gavoa Asara. Okay. So the Gemara says Tashma. Do people see where I am? Yeah, about 20 lines on that. Okay, Tashma, Osha Pires al Gabe Kinofot Psula. Okay, so the Mishnah says that if you spread it on top of the 4 poster, the 4 poles, which is what the kinofot is, it's invalid. Hasanam digvi asar. That's only, so Shmuel says that would only be when it's 10 tefachim high. The halok tani hachi, but that wasn't what the Braita teaches. The Tani, we taught in Brisa. Naklitin shnayim, the naklitin, which is okay, are 2 posts at opposite ends of the bed. So it forms a teepee because if you have a bar between them. The kinofot arba'an, the kinofot is like a 4-poster bed. Piras agabe kinofot psulat. For some, the kinofot is invalid because it creates a roof on top. Abagay naklitin g'sheira, on the naklitin where it makes a teepee, it's okay. So, provided that the naklitin are not 10 tefachim off of the bed, which basically means that either criteria is enough to invalidate. Hey, welcome back. Either 10 tefachim or a roof. Not that you need both to invalidate. Either is enough to invalidate. So Gemara says, Michlal, and from that you can infer, the kinofot, when you have the 4 posters and you have the roof, Alpha Pisha Engvoy Masara, thank you so much, even though it is not 10 tefachim high, one or the other, either roof or 10 tefachim is enough to invalidate, as opposed to what Shmuel said, which is you need both criteria to invalidate. So the Gemara says no. Shani kinofot to kavi'i. Kinofot are different. These poles attached to a bed are more fixed. It's not as of a temporary type of a pup tent, it's a real fixed feature. And as a fixed feature, we're going to be strict. And therefore, Shmuel was talking about a more temporary tent. A more temporary tent, you needed 2 things. You needed a roof and it to be 10 tefachim high to be a problem. A more type of a fixed feature, an attachment to a bed, there it's going to be invalid with one or the other. Either 10 tefachim high, even if it's a teepee, or a roof even lower. Okay, so the difference whether you need 2 criteria or 1 is a question about whether it is a fixed type of a tent, or a highly temporary one. We're on Yud Amud Bet near the bottom. So the Gemara says like this: V'harei Sukkah al Gabi Sukkah. What about a sukkah on top of a sukkah, which we know is invalid? Dikvi, that's obviously a more fixed structure. You're not moving one sukkah away from the other. It's very fixed. And v'amar Shmuel kech kach psula. And Shmuel, well, it's the same Shmuel, but Shmuel says the same way it's valid with 10 tefachim, it invalidates with 10 tefachim. So you see, the Shmuel is consistent. Shmuel says to create a problem, there are 2 types of problems. One is you have 2 kosher schachs, but it's a special invalidity we learned of yesterday, sukkah tachas sukkah. Everything is really totally kosher, but somehow a double sukkah, the bottom one is invalid. And there we said that the height for the top one to invalidate the bottom one is it has to be 10 tefachim removed. That's what Shmuel said. The same Shmuel said that when you have something which logically is even more problematic, you're in a tent inside your sukkah, so you're really in an invalid space, right? You're not in a sukkah. But there also, for the tent to be a problem, it has not enough that it has a roof, it has to be 10 tefachim. In both cases, Shmuel demands a roof and 10 tefachim. That's fine. But we just said, in order to resolve Shmuel with a contradiction, that when it's a fixed feature, even one of the criteria is enough, either roof or 10 tefachim. So if that's true, why by the sukkah under the sukkah do you need both criteria? Obviously it has a roof and you have 10 tefachim. So the Gemara says, no. Amri, you can say, Hasam de la mifsal sukkah be'asara. There, basically it's there you have a kosher sukkah, and it's invalidating the sukkah below it. So there, you're going to need a really serious sukkah above to invalidate the one below it. You need 10 tefachim. You need something that both has the roof and 10 tefachim, and something that functions as a real sukkah above if you wanted to invalidate the one below. Because it's the principle of sukkah tachas a sukkah, so the top thing has to be a sukkah. Here, you're in a tent inside of a sukkah. You don't have to call the thing you're inside a sukkah. The thing you're inside isn't a sukkah anyway, it's a tent. So you don't need the same criteria. You just have to say you don't have to. You just have to say you're basically in a separate zone. You're not underneath your sukkah. So we could be strict even less than 10 tefachim if it is a fixed type of a tent. Okay. So again, what are we saying? We're saying the special invalidity, which is a little bit hard to understand what the whole problem is. A double-decker sukkah that we can make high demands until it invalidates. The top thing has to be 10 tefachim high. It has to have a roof. We even discussed yesterday. Maybe it has to be fit for living in it. The floor won't collapse when you try to go into the double-decker sukkah. That's in order for that special invalidity. Now we're dealing though with something which is a more obvious problem. You're in a tent in your sukkah. You're really in your sukkah. Or the roof on top of you is your tent. Maybe you're not considered in your sukkah. So Shmuel says the general rule there is 2 criteria. 10 tefachim high and a tefach and a roof, not a teepee. But to deal with contradictions, we say that when you have something more fixed, not like a pop tent, but something more fixed, then even one of those criteria will be enough to invalidate. Okay. Now another statement in the name of Shmuel, and you'll see it's of a similar vein. Hayashim bekila arum motzi rosho chutz lekila v'korei kriyat shema. So if you're in a kila, which is again this type of a temporary pup tent, which is has a roof on top, but is less than 10 tefachim high. So that's the one that Shmuel would say, if you're in that in a sukkah, it doesn't invalidate because it's temporary and it's less than 10 tefachim high. Similarly, if you're sleeping in your bed that's covered by this pup tent, and you're naked on your bed, and you stick your head outside of the tent, and the rest of your body is in the tent, you can say Kriyas Shema. Why? Because why don't you say, what do you mean you say Kriyas Shema? You're naked. No, because the whole point of Shmuel is that this type of a pup tent, it's temporary, it's less than 10 tefachim, so it's considered basically not like you're under a tent. It's considered basically just like you're under a sheet. There's just a little air between you and the sheet. But it's not considered to create a separate, house or separate space, and you're naked in that space. You're basically, you're clothed. You're cloaked with this tent. All right? And therefore, you can just stick your head outside. Now, you might say, even if you're clothed with it, right? If you're wearing, let's say, a robe and there's nothing underneath, we have a normal halachic principle that that's not enough, that you need something separating your heart from your genital area, liba roa to erva. Why you need a belt or the band of your underwear. So if you take a quick look at Tosos, he says, Motzi rosha chutz l'kila, lo chaya Shmuel liba roa to erva. Shmuel doesn't hold that's a problem. Okay? So you're basically naked underneath a robe. The robe here is being called a kila. Okay, or the kila is being called a robe. But that's the same idea. It's not considered a tent. It's considered just a covering on you. Okay. So the Gemara says, Meisve, I'll ask you on this. We have a brayta that says explicitly you're not allowed to do it. So the Gemara says, same answer as before. Fine. That's when it's higher than 10. That's when he admits that that's obviously a separate, that's obviously like a tent and a separate space, not something that's just covering you. You know what? That makes sense. That when the Brayta says it's invalid is when it's 10 tefachim high. Why? Midiktani Seifa, Halamazeh Dome. At the end says, what's this like? Sticking your head under from outside of your tent, right? When it's invalid, what's that like? La'omei b'bayis arum. Like if you're naked in your house, shelo yotzi rosho chutz l'chaloni, you can't just stick your head outside of a window, so it doesn't help. So what? You're under a tent. If you're naked in your house, you're still naked. It's not clothing. So since it compares the tent reality with the house reality, presumably we're dealing with some similar type of a scenario, and therefore Shmuel says that is, that adds credence to the claim that we're talking about a tent that's 10 tefachim high. If the tent was lower, it would not make much sense to compare it to the case of the house. So Shma Mina, so that is a good point. Okay, yes, it's a good point that when it's 10 tefachim high, that this idea that the kila is a separate zone is only when it is 10 tefachim high. And now the Gemara says, Ubayis Nami, by the way, don't get us mixed, don't confuse the comparison of a house to the tent. The tent has to be 10 tefachim high, because as we said, when it's impermanent, when it's more temporary and, sort of like a pup tent thing, it needs two criteria, 10 tefachim and a roof. A house is more permanent. So therefore, afapisha ein gavo asara. If you had a house not less than 10 tefachim high, I don't know what type of a house would be less than 10 tefachim high, but whatever. You had a permanent structure less than 10 tefachim high, Kivan de Kviya, since it's fixed, Olahu, then it is an Oel, the lo gara mikinofes. It's not different from the case of the posts, okay? Meaning, and Rashi, by the way, points in, and I don't know if you sort of picked up, that's sort of like a later gloss. That's sort of like, you can hear the, it's like Kimmel's answer, and then then it seems like there's like a later gloss here that's just making sure we connected all the dots. Like, oh yeah, we already pointed out that if it's permanent, then even if it's less than 10 tefachim, so let me just make a point that the comparison of the kila to the house shouldn't be confused, and the house, by the way, if it's less than 10 tefachim, is also going to be a problem. So, what have we said now? We've said, the Mishnah says that if you're under a roof tent, it's invalid. Shmuel limits it. Shmuel says only when you have two criteria, 10 tefachim and a roof. Okay, but because of different things that he has to reconcile, he has said that that's only in a case when it's temporary, something that's more fixed and established, like a house, or like the posters of a bed, the poles on a bed, which is not like just a pup tent, you open it and you close it or whatever. Those things, even one of the two criteria would make it considered like you're in a separate space, in a separate tent, and therefore it would be invalid. Either 10 tefachim high or a rooftop. Okay, TP 10 tefachim high is a problem, rooftop less than 10 tefachim is a problem. Lishna Chrina. Now here's another version of the similar discussion. And from here to the Mishnah is going to be pretty similar, with some variation. Amrila, here's a different version, the way they say this over. Amr Rav Yehuda Mishmuel, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. You can dwell in a kilas chosan nesukkah lefi she'en lagag. So So here it's different. Before he said, even though it has a roof, it's okay if it's less than 10. Here it is saying, okay, if it doesn't have a roof, it's okay even though it's higher than 10. To people here, it's basically the flip, right, of what we said before. Before we said, if it has a roof, it's okay if it's less than 10. Here we said, if it doesn't have a roof, it's okay even though it's higher than 10, which basically boils down to be a problem, you need both. Right, you need both criteria. You need 10 and a roof. So here he's saying the flip side, that even though it's 10, if it doesn't have a roof, meaning if it comes to a point, if it's a teepee, it's okay. Meisvei says, the Gemara, I'll ask you on this, if you're in this tent, it's not good. No, fine. That's the case where not only it's 10, but it has a roof. Tashma, naklitin shnayim b'kinofos arba. The naklitin, which are good, are 2 posts, so it's a teepee. The kinofos are 4, so it's a tent. Agab pirs, agabi kinofos psula. If you do it on the kinofos, then it's not good. You have a roof. Agabi naklitin sheira. The naklitin is okay because it's a teepee. Ubuvad shelo yehu naklitin mina mita asara. As long as it's not 10 tefachim high. So this one is the bright that we started with before, that says either criteria is enough. Even if it's a teepee, 10 tefachim high is a problem. So if that's true, that was Shmuel's case. Shmuel said 10 tefachim is not a problem when it's a teepee. This says 10 tefachim is a problem even if it's a teepee. So the Gemara says, Hagavoim minamita asara psula. So you see, once it's 10 tefachim high, it's invalid. Afa pisha ein lagag, although it doesn't have a roof, even though it's a teepee, which is against what Shmuel said. No, same answer. Shani naklitin dikvi. The naklitin are different. They're fixed to the bed, and therefore, because it's more fixed, 10 tefachim is a problem even without a roof. So again, Shmuel says to be a problem you need two things: 10 tefachim and a roof. Okay, but that's his kila case. In the earlier version, he emphasized even though it has a roof, it's not a problem if it's not 10. Here he's saying even though it's 10, it's not a problem if it's not a roof. But basically, it's the same point. You need both criteria. What do you do with the Breita that speaks about the posters to the bed, the poles on the bed, that says that either 10 or a roof? So he says, that's because that's more permanent. Therefore, there, either 10 or a roof. I'm dealing with a kila, less permanent. I need both criteria. So the Gemara says, Ikvi, if it's more permanent, lehavik kinofos, why isn't it as bad as the kinofos? The kinofos, the 4 poles, are a problem even lower than 10 tfachim. Why is this a problem only higher than 10 tfachim, the 2 poles? So says no. Legabi kinofos lokvi. Relative to the kinofos, it's less permanent. Legabi kila kvili. Relative to the kila, it's more permanent. Now there actually was an easier answer, because the 4, which Tosfos points out, the 4 poles, you have a roof. That's why it's a bigger problem. But again, we can assume that's what the Gemara means. So again, you have your 2 scenarios, right? You've got your tent here, which is 10 tefachim high, but it comes to a roof, and then you've got that's your teepee, and then you've got your normal thing, which is I don't know, we'll call it 9 tefachim high. Okay, but so this is only one. So this has a roof. This is tefach that has a roof. This has the yud tefachim. Okay, but ein la tefach. Okay, so are these a problem? Each one of these has one of the criteria, right? This has the roof criteria. This has the 10 tefachim criteria. The Breita basically says that each one is a problem on the bed. That's the kinofos and the naklitin. Okay, this is the kinofos. Did I get that right? Which is which? Let's take a look. No, this is the naklitin. This is the naklitin. This is the kinofos. The Breita says that each one of those is a problem, either the tefach or the 10 tefachim. Shmuel says only both of them. And the basic answer is that Shmuel's case, that these are all attached to a bed. Okay, I guess this would be like a side view on your bed. There's your bed anyway. Okay, these are all attached to a bed. Okay, whatever. Well, that actually was a bad example, but you get the idea. Anyway, these are all attached to a bed, so therefore they're more permanent, and therefore one of the criteria is enough. Shmuel's case is a pup tent, and in his case of a pup tent, which is less permanent, or something like a pup tent, right? Therefore, you're going to need both criteria. You're going to need to be both 10 tefachim and have that.
That's not obvious.
Then the Gemara says, not obvious at all. What does permanence have to do with it? The concept of being a tent. We'll see something that somewhat touches on it. It could be that, like saying one of the criteria is only a derabanan, that the real doraita problem requires both, but once it's more permanent, we're going to rabbinically demand only one. It's not logical why, just because it's more permanent, if the 2 features combined make it a tent, why one feature becomes more of a thing once it's more permanent. It does not make sense. Okay? But anyway,
I missed something there.
The better example here.
Which is the kila?
So the kila is not being drawn here. These are like attached to a bed.
What is it?
A kila would be a similar type of a canopy, but it would be more like something you spread out and then you remove. It is draped over.
There's nice pictures here.
Right, just like a pup. It is draped over, but it's not it's not a part of the bed, right?
The kila is the blue one?
Yeah.
How is that different from the...
Because one is like a tent that you come and it's portable and you open it up and then you remove it. This is a permanent part of the bed. This is just attached to the bed.
Isn't
Okay.
there another case where the bridal canopy comes to a point on the bottom?
What?
Is there another case in here we discussed where there's a bridal canopy that comes to a point at the top?
That's what this is.
Oh, that's the I thought that's the tent.
No, I mean both of these are cases on a bed.
Oh, they're
Okay, they're both again, you sort of imagine.
Oh, okay,
Right.
I see.
You imagine those are both different ways of being over bed, but it's more. Think about the kilos like mosquito netting or something. These are like a fixture on the bed. Okay, so therefore those only one is enough. Only one invalidates, where Shmuel requires both to invalidate. So now the Gemara says like this: Darash Rabbi bar Rav Huna. So with all those things, okay, at least Shmuel, everybody would agree that with 2 criteria it's invalid. But comes along Rabbi bar Rav Huna and he teaches Mutar Lishon B'Kila, Alpha Bisha Ish Lagag, Alpha Bisha Gavor Asara. You can swell in a kila. It's 10 tefachim high. It has a roof. Fine. I mean, it's crazy. What do you do about all the Breitas and Mishnahs that we quoted before? So the Gemara says it actually will work out according to a particular opinion. Kiman, who is this going like to Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar lo asi ol arai mevatel ol keva. A temporary tent does not come and negate a permanent tent. Now you'll remember that Rabbi Yehuda is identified as one of the opinions that sees a sukkah as being permanent, as sukkah diras keva, and that's probably relevant. And all these things, your bed inside your sukkah, right, a canopy over a bed is temporary relative to, although we've been calling it more permanent than a pup tent, it's still temporary relative to the sukkah structure. And therefore he says, if you're in a bed, under a canopy, in a sukkah, and somebody said, where are you? You wouldn't say, I'm under my canopy. You'd say, I'm in my sukkah, right? So therefore, he says, that does not define you as being in a separate space. It's only a temporary relative to the sukkah, which is permanent. Okay? So he says like this. Titnan, we taught in the Mishnah, I'm Rabbi Yehuda. We would sleep underneath the bed in front of the elders, and they never said anything during Sukkot, in the Sukkah, and they never said it was a problem. So you see, it's okay. Now you could have said that's less than 10 tefachim, different types of things, but the Gemara understands that it's a general principle that it is never a problem. So the Gemara says, "V'lema halach Rabbi Yehuda." So if that's what he's basing himself on, why say, "Oh, you can sleep in a kila even though it's 10 tefachim, even though it has a roof"? Just say, "Oh, we will like that Rabbi Yehuda of the Mishnah." No, because that Rabbi Yehuda of the Mishnah is not as obviously as strong as the statement that was made. Iyamar halach Rabbi Yehuda. How do you just say we will like Rabbi Yehuda? I mean, I would have said, "Hanim yilimita." Fine. If you're under a bed, I'm not going to say you're in a separate space. You're under a separate roof because the bed is made for sleeping on top of it. So being under a bed, right? You don't say the space under a bed is naturally defined as like a separate zone, a separate area. Okay, it's not like it's made to serve as a roof to the area below it. A canopy that is made for the area below it to serve as a roof to the area below it. Amalo, maybe we would not be lenient. Maybe in that case we would say you are under a different roof and you're not under the roof of a sukkah. Kamash Malan, so he's teaching us, time of the Rabbi Yehuda, the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda is to lo asi orai muvato lo keva, that it is a categorical principle. The sukkah is o keva. All these things are considered temporary tents, and it does not negate it, meaning it does not make it like you're under a different roof. Fundamentally, you're under the roof of the sukkah. Lo shna mitav lo shna kila. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a bed or whether you're talking about a kila. Okay, it's an interesting question. Can you eat under a table in your sukkah? All right, so that would be based on this. And now, how do we rule? Like, so if you take a look at Tosos, mutter lishan bekilas chasanim besukkah afish yesh lagag afish gemara sarah ain halacha kei. Okay, so the Gemara basically has identified this with Rabbi Yehuda. We do not rule that way, and we rule that you cannot. Okay, but it might be if it's like underneath the table and something so temporary, that's like the kila, you would need two things, a tefach and 10 tefachim. I don't know, a table has a tefach. Does it have 10 tefachim? 3 feet under the table, 30 inches? Probably not.
It's a little lower.
Little lower.
Most tables.
Okay.
But
Interesting.
that
would have to be a twist on that famous Hasidic story about the guy who was under the table, right? The guy, the famous. Okay, whatever. Yeah, like he goes down, he thinks he's a chicken. Yeah, anyway, okay, yeah.
But this creates an interesting question for Shabbat. How can we set up folding tables?
Excellent. I was going to reference that, right? The whole idea about you can't make an oil on Shabbat. Right. How do you create a folding table? So there's a lot of specifics about that, but one of the most basic differences is exactly what the Gemara said here. Fundamentally, it's not considered an ohel because it's not made for the space below it. It's made to serve the space above it. Okay, so that actually is a major reason why that's okay. Same by a folding chair and so on. Other reasons as well, but okay, it's on hinges, so it naturally opens and closes. Anyway, fine. Let's look at the next Mishnah, and we quoted this earlier. You sort of bent over your sukkah a grapevine or a gourd. I always wonder why it gives the example of a gourd. I mean, I guess because it covers a lot of area, but you're not bending the gourd. You're bending, I guess, the vine, and now the gourd is serving as schach. A gourd sort of grows like gourds grow. They must grow above the ground, right? They're not. So, they're fruits. Okay. Vesakisom or the kisom. I don't know how they translate kisom there. Rashi says it's a type of a vine. Ivy? Oh, ivy? Really? Okay. Interesting. Okay. There's
a picture of a gourd here.
Excellent. Okay. And now you put the schach, and you use that to be the schach on top of the sukkah. So basically you have stuff that's still attached to the ground. psula, it's invalid because it's not enough that it grows from the ground. It has to be detached. But if you added schach and there's a majority of kosher schach, okay, and before we discussed the issue about that, if you like mix it together, so it's not that everything is in a distinct zone, then it all gets looked at as a unit, and you go by the majority. So having a majority of kosher schach, again, if things are mixed together, that's one way to make it fine. And we discussed that earlier, and now we're going to look at the second part, which we did not discuss earlier. Oshekititzan, if you actually cut them. You had the vine was over the sukkah, the gourd was over the sukkah, and then you just cut the vine, okay, and now it's detached. Kshera,
wow.
That's principle.
Cool.
Now, this is the principle. Anything that is susceptible for becoming tamei, like a vessel or food that has water that has come in contact with it after it's been cut, and it does not grow from the ground, or it does not go from the ground, you cannot use it for schach. But if it both cannot become tamei, is not a vessel, and number two, it also grew from the ground, and also it's like I said, not food that became in contact with water, then mesachimbo, you can use it for schach. By the way, the food not in contact with water is interesting because that's something that will become tamei once it comes in contact with water. So just because right now it cannot become tamei, that sort of gets ruled out as well. Anything that could be in that category of being potentially susceptible for becoming tamei. Anyway, let's take a look at the Gemara, because the Gemara is going to focus on the case of cutting the vine after the schach is already on it. Yosef Rav Yosef coming to Rav Kahuna. So Rav Yosef was sitting in front of Rav Kahuna. V'yasi v'kama. And he was sitting and he was saying, Osha kitzan kshera, if you cut it, it's kosher, the vine. V'amar Rav, but Rav says, not really. Tzarich linaneya. So you have to, even after you've cut the vine, you have to move the schach a little bit. Why? Because there's a general problem which you might be familiar with called ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. Chag hasuko ta'aseh lecha. Okay, we're going to see it by tzitzit as well. The Pasuk says, Gedilim ta'aseh lecha. That when you make it into the object of a mitzvah, it has to be actively made, not somehow indirectly something happened and then all of a sudden it came into existence. What would be that example? So the classic example is that you have a haystack and you dig a hole in the haystack and now you have a sukkah, right? But the roof, remember, Sukkot primarily focuses on schach. So if you have to make the schach, you didn't actually make the schach. You made the cavity, and the schach came into existence. Okay, that would not be good. Even though we said, remember, sukkah does not have to be made for the sake of the chag. It only has to be made for the sake of giving shade. It could be made, by non-Jews. It could be made for animals. Yes, but it has to be made. The schach has to be made, not just indirectly. You did something else, and then it popped into existence. Okay, so therefore, here's going to be the question. You bent the schach you bent the gourd over the roof. That was your act of making, but it wasn't yet kosher schach. You cut it, it became kosher schach. But it became kosher schach, but it wasn't made. It had already been made, but it was invalid. And when it became valid, it wasn't being made. So it shouldn't be good. That's the question. Yes.
That's one will also apply to if you put Succah first,
right?
Frame, say, and then build the walls.
Excellent question. So that's actually a machlokas haposkim. If you put the schach up and then you do the walls, so the schach is made, but the sukkah isn't kosher yet, right? So that actually is actually debated in the poskim whether that's good or not. And that's actually very relevant because with our modern sukkahs, that'd be very easy to do, right? You make the frame, throw up the schach, and then you put up the walls, right?
Yeah,
so
you just, raise it afterwards.
then you can just lift it up and down, right?
That's what's doing it, right?
Right, but that's the question, whether that's necessary. So Rav says, cutting it isn't enough. You have to move it a little bit. If that's true, there's not much of a chiddush in the Mishnah. Maybe the chiddush is you don't have to literally take it off and put it back on. Just a little bit of moving is enough. Maybe lift it up a tefach. Not exactly clear how much. So that's what Rav Yosef was saying. Amalei Rav Huna. So Rav Huna said, Hashmuel Amra. That's not Rav. That's Shmuel who said that. So Adrinu Rav Yosef Ape. So Rav Yosef turned his face away from him. He got really angry. He said, "Va'amarle atu mi kamino chadlo Amar Shmuel. What are you doing contradicting me? I didn't say Shmuel didn't say it. Amar Rav, Amar Shmuel. Rav said it. Shmuel said it. Don't say no. Shmuel said that.
They agree on something.
No, but he's saying, what are you doing correcting me? I said Rav said it. Good. Shmuel also said it. Don't correct me. So Amarle Rav Huna. Rav Huna said back to him, you misunderstood me. I was correcting you. This is what I was saying to you. To Shmuel Amra, the low Rav. That's a position of Shmuel, and it's not a position of Rav. Rav actually would say you don't have to move the schach. You could just cut it, and it would be okay. Why? Rav would say that case is kosher. He had Rav Amram Chasida, like a similar story with Rav Amram Chasida. Rama Tichlasa, the Farzuma de Inchi Beise. He put tcheles. Now, tcheles is a word that is means tzitzis because it focuses. It doesn't mean just the tcheles. There's actually an English word for that for a something that a piece of something represents the whole. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, there's some literary term. Anyway, tcheles in the Gemara means tzitzis. Okay, most of the time, like in this context, not always. So he put tzitzis for the parzuma, for the talis of Inche Beise, the people of his household, which people of his household generally means the women, his wife. So interesting in what's going on right now in the last 2 weeks in the Jewish community. He was making tzitzis for his wife. He felt that women are obligated in tzitzis. It's not limited to the daytime. It applies at night as well. So he was making tzitzis for his wife. Okay. He suspended them, which means he stuck them in the hole. Okay, he inserted them, but he did not cut the heads of them. So what does that mean? It means if you know how, like if you imagine a string, fold over a long string like 4 times, right? Fold it over 4 times. You have like 4 ends, but at 2 of the ends, they're looped. They're not really 4 strings. It's really one big string folded over 4 times. Take that, put it through the hole of the tzitzit, use the loose thing to do all the knots and all the winding, and now you have a whole thing of tzitzit really made with 1 string. And after you're done, if you snip the loops, then you're going to get your 4 strings. But when you're making it, it's 1 string, not 4 strings. Okay? So that's what he did. Also, he came in front of Rav Chia Barashi. Amalei, Hachi Amar Rav. Here's what Rav says: Mefaskan v'hen ksherim. Sure, you can snip them and they'll be fine. The act of snipping them and making them into 4 strings is the act of making them into tzitzit. Okay, so that actually is valid. Presumably, it's not tasev lo min asui because it required an act. Although the act was not the physical act of making, the act was the halachic act. It wasn't the physical act of like putting him in the hole and twisting or whatever, but it was a physical act, and it made them kosher. That is considered the act of making. Okay, so yes, and the same is by snipping the gourd off of the vine, right? It is a physical act. It's not done to the gourd itself, it's done to the vine. But it wasn't an act of putting the gourd on the sukkah, but it was a physical act. It did make it valid. That is considered an act of making the object. Okay? So that's what Rav says. Mefaskan, cut them, v'hein ksherim, they'll be kosher. Alma, psikatan, zuhi asiyatan. The cutting of them is the making of them, even though it was not the winding of the string and putting it in the hole. It was a physical act done that made it valid. That is considered making it. Hachanami, here too, psitatan, zohi asiyatan. Cutting the vine is the making of the schach. So Rav would actually say, and that's actually the more pasha pshat of the Mishnah, that it's a sufficient to cut it. Okay. For Savar Shmuel, so now the Gemara says, does Shmuel hold lo aminim psikason du yasiyatan? Does Shmuel disagree with that? Cutting it is not making it. V'atani Shmuel mishum Rabbi Chia. Shmuel himself teaches in the name of Rabbi Chia. He did l'shnei kranot b'vasachas. Basically, what you did is you took the 2 corners of your garment and you put them together, and you put your 4 strings of tzitzit between the 2 corners of your garment, right? You got the holes, right? So we have an example. Anyway, here, take off my cap. That's a little show and demonstration. What you did was, right? You put your 2 corners together. You have holes in each of them, right? You put the 4 strings through the holes, right? And then you go ahead and whatever, you got a lot of like loose stuff going on here. You wrap it, you do the whole thing, but really you've got just, you don't have 2 sets of 4 strings. You have 1 set of 4 strings, and after, again, you're done with the whole thing, then you snip it. Okay, similar idea that first you make it, and then you snip it, and only then does it really become the right types of strings. All right, so it's very similar to the other case with a variation. And afterwards, only after you sort of put them through and made them into tzitzit, you cut them and you turn them into 2 sets of strings. Ksherin, it's kosher. So you see, Shmuel holds also cutting it is enough. So my love, shekosher v'achak posek. Does it not mean like I described it to you that first you did all the knotting and everything was done and it was still invalid, and the last thing you did was you separated them. So you see that act of separation was what made them. Isn't that the scenario? So it says, no, that's not necessarily the scenario. Kosher. First you snipped them. The only thing you did wrong or you did unusual was you put them through both holes at the same time, right? But as soon as you got them through both holes, you snipped them right at that moment. And then when you did the knotting and the twisting, that was all, everything was totally fine, okay? So the only thing you did wrong was the putting in the holes. Then what's the chiddush? So then, of course, you made it kosher, because once you started with your twisting and your knotting, you had 2 sets of 4 strings. Who cares that you put them in the holes at the same time? No, I might have thought, Ba'inan knaf b'shat p'til. The p'til means the string. The knaf is the corner. So when you have the string in it, when you initially insert the string, it has to be one corner, not here where the string is in 2 corners. Veleka, and you don't have it. Kamash malan. So fine, I might have thought that even at the moment you insert it in, right, it has to be, like exactly in the right form. No, you can insert it, then cut it, and then you can start your twists and your knots. But at least there, when you're doing your twists and your knots, you're doing an actual asiyah and everything is kosher. So the only chiddush there is when you insert it in the hole, it doesn't have to be totally kosher yet. But nevertheless, the knotting and the tying and the twisting, all of that is totally kosher. That's a real asiyah, as opposed to Rav, who says you could wait till the very end of the process and cut it then, and that cutting at the end will make the whole, will be the entire asiyah, will be the entire making of it. Okay, Kamash Malan that you don't need that. Meisvei. So now I'm going to ask you on Rav's idea that you can cut it at the end. You put the tzitzit in the hole and you didn't cut the heads. Psulim, it's invalid. So that's a question to Rav, who says you can just cut them. Ma'ila psulim lo'olam. Doesn't that mean that they remain pasul now that you've made them into tzitzit? There's no way to fix it. V'tiyufti to Rav, a contradiction to Rav. Rav will say to you, no, my psulim achieve Succah. No, it means they're invalid right now. But you can still fix it, just cut it, which is pretty funny because then what's the chiddush? But okay, the chiddush is that they have to be 4 separate strings. It can't be 1 string bolted over 4 times. But yeah, fine, just means it's invalid until you snip it. For Shmuel says no, psulim la'olam. Give me a break. Psulim means it's totally invalid. You have to make it when it's 4 strings. You cannot cut it at the end. Levi, and that's what Levi says, psulim la'olam. They're always invalid. I mean, of course, you could untie it and do it again, but meaning in this state where it's already been tied and knotted, there's nothing you can do. Rav Masna Shmuel psulim le'olam. That's a pretty funny v'chein since it's Rav Masna quoting Shmuel. But okay. Anyway, Rav is a lone voice here that says that cutting at the end is like the making of it. Okay.
You said the other day that if they list several opinions like that, the Asian usually is against that.
No, what I meant was no. When it says this, A paskins this, and B and C and D paskin is actually that supports the position. No, what I was saying was that the Gemara said the phrase was specifically kulu sviralhu, when an Amoer comes and identifies a number of different Tanayim that are all variations on a theme. It says so and so and so and so and so and so kulu sviralhu X. That's often said as a way of like marginalizing that position. They're all coming from this unusual position of X. But this is a discussion where we're just saying he paskins this way, he paskins. That's opposed to identifying distinct Tanayim in distinct cases and saying they're all part of a similar camp. That was what I was referring to before when Abai was identifying Diras Keva. Okay, so all right. So that's what we have. We did that. Some say actually this exactly happened with me, is that I did the whole folding over and I made my tzitzis and then I needed to cut it. I'll say and I came in front of Shmuel, but and Shmuel said, I'm sorry, buddy, you can't just cut them, you got to undo it and do the whole thing again. It remains invalid. Okay, so basically Rav is a lone voice here. Others say, I'm Rav Masna, I just said that. Meisvei, I'll ask you on this. Here's another challenge on Rav. It says you suspended them, and then it says, and you cut them after you put them in the hole. It says they're invalid, right? That's a real contradiction on Rav. It explicitly says even after cutting it's invalid. V'o Tanya gabe Sukkah, and we taught by Sukkah. ta'aseh v'lo mina asui. You shall make Chag HaSukkos ta'aseh. You shall make your sukkah, and not something that is all pre-made, made indirectly, and not directly made by you. Mikan amru, and from this they said, Hila lesa gefen vesad las vesakisam. If you bent the gourd or the vine or the ivy on your sukkah, v'sichech hagaban psula, and you put tzchach on it, it's invalid. So, hechidami, why is that an application of the principle of ta'aseh v'lo min asui? The way it's described, the problem is that it's pasul schach. If the scenario is that you got your gourd on your sukkah, but it hasn't been cut, that's not an application of the ta'aseh v'lo min asui principle. Typically, learn it out, that it's attached to the ground. That's the problem of the case. So how is this being given as an example of ta'aseh v'lo min asui? Ella b'shekitatzan. The only explanation is that the Braita is assuming you bent the gourd over and then you cut it. And that's why it's a principle of ta'aseh v'lo min asui, and that's no good because it was not made when it was kosher. It was first made and then became kosher. V'ktani psula, and it says it's invalid. And you see that the cutting does not make it. To Rav, and it's a contradiction to Rav. So these are pretty good proofs against Rav. Let's, however, not forget that the simple sense of the Mishnah supports Rav. The simple sense of the Mishnah says you cut it and it's kosher. Okay, and Shmuel has to add, I want to know, you move the schach afterwards, etc. But okay, the Gemara here has some other things that contradict Rav. So Amalach Rav, so Rav will tell you, what are we talking about here? You didn't do it a nice snip with a scissor and really cut it. You sort of yanked it out, but it's out of the ground. But it's sort of like it's still intertwined with the vines. Imagine you got like a heavy vine growth, and you sort of pull something out, and it's still there. Visibly, it looks like it's still connected to the ground. It's still like a lot of you've got something that's like sheathed in a bark, and you pull it out, and it's still sheathed in the bark, even though it's not completely attached anymore. So that's the scenario. So therefore. Okay, so in that case, it's not obvious that you've actually have transformed it. Technically, it's not mechubar, but it's not obvious. So it's a weak answer because who cares if it's not obvious? Halachically, that's considered a making. That's considered a making. It sounds like he's creating some durabanan problem. Like it does not look obviously separate, and therefore it's going to rabbinically remain a problem because it still looks attached. Okay, although then the problem should be that it's considered attached, not ta'aseh v'lo min asui. So he's reframing it as if you don't do an obvious change of what the object looks like, an obvious physical change, right? Then you are, then we cannot halachically call it, probably let's say rabbinically, we cannot call it like you've transformed it. You've now made the schach. To say your cutting makes it means that it will only be willing to acknowledge that if there's a visible change. If you've changed it halachically without it being too visible, we won't consider that a new making. So the Gemara says, Mikol makom tlan v'achar pasakasha. Fine, but that doesn't deal with the case by the tzitzis, which is very visible. The case of the tzitzis says if you put the strings in and then you cut it, it's invalid, even after you cut it. So, kasha l'Rav. So the Gemara says, kasha, fine, you're right, it's difficult. These braitas, some of this evidence is going against Rav, and makes it sound like cutting does not suffice. Okay, one more try. Lema kitanai. Maybe we'll say, in order to a little bit back up Rav, because we have now some evidence against him, although the simple sense of the Mishnah is like him, maybe this issue is a debate of Tanaim, okay, whether cutting it is a making of it for ta'aseh purposes. By the way, anytime the Gemara says lema kitanai, let's say it's like a debate of Tanaim, means it's going to reject it. If it says kitanai, that means we're going to make the assertion and stick with it that it corresponds to a debate of Tanaim. Lema kitanai means let's say that it is, and we're going to say no, it actually is not necessarily that's what's going on. Okay, but we're going to now try to find maybe some Tana that supports Rav. Over Velikton, you have, this is going on a Mishnah we'll see later, that you have a hadas that has berries on it. I don't know if anybody ever saw a hadas with berries. You can see it sometimes. And it says if there are too many berries, it invalidates the hadas. Okay? So, what? There's a picture. There you go. Now, you went ahead and you picked the berries off of the hadas. Pasul, it's invalid. Divrei Rabbi Shimon Bar Yehotzadok, that's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yehotzadok says. Plucking the berries doesn't help. The Chami Machshir, the Chami say it's kosher. Now that's a very bizarre debate. Why would anybody say it's invalid, even if you can't have the berries? So pluck them off. right? Why should fixing it not work? You plucked off the berries. So here's how the Gemara is going to explain what that debate is about. Savrua, we're assuming, lulav tzarich eged. Everybody is assuming that you have to make a knot in your sukkah. We'll see later, it's a debate whether in a sukkah you have to knot the three meaning together, like we do, the lulav, the hadas, and the arava. I mean, we do it with this, this accordion type of a thing. I actually don't like the accordion thing. I actually just take a strand of a lulav leaf, and I sort of make it thin. I do it like lengthwise, and I use it as a nice string, and I make a double knot. We can talk about that when we get to the third parak. But anyway, that's the idea that you have to knot the three things together. So that's a position of Reb Yehuda, but now we're going to assume that everybody holds to that position. If that's true, right? Otherwise, what's the taseh for the lulav, for the minim? You're not making them. You're not making it into the mitzvah object. What, plucking it off the tree? And anyway, why don't we say the plucking of the berries is the making of it? So the only way you have a taseh problem by lulav is if you have to make it into a bundle. If there's an idea of a bundle of three of them, and that's made by knotting them together, that's the making. Now we can get an interesting scenario. You bundled them together and you knotted them together, and one of them was invalid. So that's like putting the schach on the top of the sukkah while it's invalid. Now you're going to make it valid. You're going to pluck the berries off. So now you've made it kosher, but after it's already been physically made into that object, after it's been made into the buzzle, now you're making a kosher. So maybe, says the Gemara, that's the debate that's going on here. Whether the plucking of the berries, once it's in the bundle, can be considered like you've now made the bundle, whether you've done the right making of the lulav or not. So let's take a look. Okay, so it says like this. Okay. So Savrua D'chuli Amalulav Tark Eged, you need to make it into a bundle. So therefore, there's an idea of making it. The Yafinan Lulav Sukkah, and we learn Lulav from Sukkah that there's an act of making. D'chsiv Gabi Sukkah Ta'aseh, you shall make. Where the rabbinic interpretation is V'lo mina asui, not something that is sort of made by itself. So, and the same way, if you need a bundle by a lulav, you need to do an act of making. And my lab, let's see, this is what they debate. The one that says it's kosher holds, that the cutting of it is the making of it. And you would say that by the schach of the sukkah. And similar by plucking the berries. When you pluck the berries and made it into a kosher hadas, now that is considered the act of making it into a bundle. Uman the puzzle, the one that says it's invalid, no, cutting is not an act of making. It doesn't work by sukkah. Similar by lulav, we don't say plucking the berries is the act of making, and therefore it remains invalid because it was already part of the bundle. So maybe that's the exact debate, whether the cutting and the making of it kosher is like the act of making of the object. So is that a way to read it? Someone says, look, not necessarily. A lot of other ways they could be debating. I'll give you this possibility. Everybody holds like Shmuah, which is clearly the direction the Gemara is going, that cutting does not make it, is not considered an act of making. And maybe I'll even concede that you need to have an eged by a lulav. But that doesn't mean that the word, when do we say this principle of ta'aseh v'lo min asoy? It's not a universal principle. Anytime you need a mitzvah object, you have to actively make it. We limit it to places where the verse says ta'aseh. Gidilim ta'aseh lecha. By tzitzit, you shall make for yourself tzitzit. Sukkah kasukos ta'aseh lecha. You shall make. So it's like, you know what? Maybe lulav has to be a bundle. But nobody ever told you needed an act of making. It never says ta'aseh by lulav. Okay, so that's the debate. Do you learn lulav from Sukkah? The one that says it's kosher says you don't learn lulav from Sukkah. Sukkah might have to be a bundle, but it doesn't need an active act of making. The one that says it's invalid, no. The same way Sukkah needs an active act of making, the same is true by the lulav. That's one way they could debate. They all agree you need a bundle. They all agree cutting isn't good. The question is, do you need an active act of making? Do you need ta'aseh? The Ibai Sema, here's another way of saying the debate. Were we to hold that you needed a bundle and by lulav, everybody will concede. You need a bundle by lulav, so we're going to learn it from sukkah. You need to actively make the bundle. But this will be the debate. Marsavar tzarich eged. One holds it needs to be a bundle, and therefore plucking the berries afterwards is no good, because when it was made into a bundle, it was invalid. Marsavar ain't tzarich eged. And the other said it doesn't need to be a bundle, and therefore what do I care if you pluck the berries afterwards? Okay, it doesn't have to be a bundle to begin with. So there's no problem of indirectly making it. Nothing has to be made. You don't need a bundle. Ubeplukta dahani tanai, and this question whether lulav needs a bundle or not. So we're basically now, by the way, done with the discussion of tasev lomina asui. We've agreed that we've shown that all the weight, although Rav is the simple sense of the Mishnah, the weight of the Gemara's discussion and the weight of the Brysas point to Shmuel, that once something is made, cutting it and making it kosher is not an act of making. Okay. And therefore, and what's going on by lulav is different discussions, whether it needs an egged, does it need an egged, and so on, whether lulav requires an act of making. But the general principle is if something needs to be made, like tzitzis or lulav or sukkah, it has to be made when the thing is kosher. You can't make it, and then even by doing a physical act, like cutting it, that would not be enough to be considered that you have made it. Okay, so Dov does raise, I should just repeat, an interesting question. What if you made the schach and afterwards the walls were made? It had reminded me that there's some post Achronim want to bring a proof to that from a discussion earlier in the Gemara. I remember the Gemara said, like, if something works for Shabbos, it works for Sukkah. Like if it was if it was Sukkah's Shabbos and you had the lechi and it worked for your mabwe and Shabbos, now it's going to work for Sukkah. So some say, look, that's a case where the walls got made after the schach was already up, because you had the schach up, you had two walls, came Shabbos, and then that was like a third wall got created. So that's an interesting example used for the idea that maybe making the walls after the schach is good. But here we're talking about the schach as the focus, and when the schach is up, it has to be kosher. Yes.
Yeah, usually we follow Rav again in disputes.
I know, but usually. But here, when all the evidence points in one way and the discussion of the Gemara points in one way. So now let's just wrap up this issue of lulav tzarich eged. We'll be plugged to Dahani Tanai, and this is based on the debate of Tanaim. The Tani we turn the Brisa, lulav bein agud bein she'eino agud kosher, whether a lulav is bound together with the hadas and the arav, it's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda omer agud kosher she'eino agud pasul. Only if it's bound is it kosher. My time at Rabbi Yehuda, what's his reasoning? Yalif lekicha lekicha me'agudat ezov. He learns the verse take. It says take a lulav, and it says take the bundle of the ezov. And there, the object that's taken is a bundle with the other sort of things that are mentioned. Here too, it has to be bundled. Ksiv hasam b'lakachtem agudat ezov. You take a bundle of ezov, right, which is bundled with other things. V'ksiv hacha b'lakachtem lachem b'yom rishon. Malahalan be'aguda, afkan be'aguda. The same way, that's a bundle of the other objects mentioned here too. By the way, why not also bundle up the esrog? If you have to bundle it, why does the esrog accept? So you could just say it's physically a little awkward, but who cares? If you need a bundle, you need a bundle. So the Gemara discusses it later, but I'll just tell you, it's indicated by the psukim. Because it says, by the pasuk, L'kachtem lachem b'yom rishon priye tzadar, v'kapot marim, priye tzadar, I just read it, priye tzadar, kama, kapot marim, ve'anafei tzavot, ve'arvei nachal, right, usmachtem. So there's no vav that connects the esrog to the lulav, but the lulav has a vav connecting the lulav and the arvei nachal and the hadas and the arvei nachal. So those are all connected with a vav, but they're not connected to the esrog. So that actually is how they learn that the bundle is without the esrog. Okay, so Rabbanan, what did the rabbi say back? L'kicha mi'lekicha lo yafinan. We don't make that connection. Taman azahat Tanya. Who is it going like that which we teach in a Braita? Lulav mitzvah la'ogdo. It's a mitzvah to make the bundle. V'im lo ogdo kasher. And if you didn't make it, it's still kasher. Reb Yehuda. If it's Reb Yehuda, kilo ogdo my kasher. Then why is it b'diavad kasher? Reb Yehuda explicitly says if it's not in a bundle, it's invalid. Rabbanan. If it's the rabbis, my mitzvah. Where's this mitzvah coming from? It says la'olam Rabbanan. It is the rabbis. It's because of the idea of this is my God and I will beautify him or glorify him. Glorify yourself in front of him in the doing of mitzvot, which is interpreted to mean make the mitzvot look beautiful. So bundling it up is not a requirement of a bundle per se. It is a way of making it look beautiful. Now I should say, and we'll discuss it more when we learn the third parak, that there's an interesting debate. Is the idea here purely aesthetic, this idea of an eged for the rabbis? So even if it's not halachically, let's say it's a technical knot, but you make a beautiful thing that brings them all together, but it's not technically like knotted together. It's all really an aesthetic point. It looks nicer when it's all together. Or they say no, that almost at like a conceptual level, making it a bundle is having it halachically be knotted together, is what is considered to be a nicer fulfillment, even beyond the aesthetic point. So this leads to the issue of you have to make a double knot. Like some people, like me personally, I don't like those accordion things. A, I don't like it because the leaves always get pulled off. And B, I actually think that the simple string and the knot actually looks nicer. It looks more, I don't know, just more natural.
So you'll have to
but
show us how to tie this.
I will. It's very trivial. It's so easy. Anyway, but some people will say, actually, it's not kosher. It's not kosher, but you don't fulfill the rabbinic idea, the rabbi's lichatchila of eged, because it's not a double knot. And for an eged, you need a double knot. So if you say it's just an issue of aesthetics, who cares if it constitutes a double knot or not? But if you say, no, it's a concept of being a bundle, of a halachic bundle, then you might, even for the rabbis, to get that lichatchila, need a double knot. Others say, because it's held very firmly, it serves the same function as a double knot. But anyway, there is an important question of what does this zekeli ganveu mean in this context, if it's limited just to the aesthetic point. Okay, we will end with that.
What do you peel down one leaf and twist it around?
Yeah, you